go ahead and get started with today's committee meeting. We have two committee members attending virtually, and then another board member who's on the committee who will be arriving late. I'm going to start with introductions, and Liz, can you start? We'll go down the dais and then to the virtual.
Liz Large, Contractor General Counsel.
Mary Kane, Senior Legal Counsel.
Julia Brum Edwards, board member and committee member. Director Wong.
Eddie Wong, board member, committee member, and homesick right now.
I'm sorry to hear that. Frankie.
Hi, I'm Frankie Silverstein, representative, and I use she, they pronouns.
Great. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and given we have some people here for public comment, I'm going to start with public comment first versus at the end of the meeting. We are not moving any items on the agenda out of committees, so I think it's fine to move the public comment to the start. Ms. Bradshaw, do you want to call?
Yes. Andrew Harvey. If it's green, then it's already on, and they'll
Okay.
turn you up when you get started.
Hi, my name's Andrew Harvey. I use he, him. I'm a parent of a Franklin High School freshman this year, and I'm going to offer some comment on cell phone use at schools. It's been a hot topic at home, and it seems like something that we could use some help from the school district to contain in the classrooms. So the allure of social media apps, heavily engineered to keep users constantly engaged, distracts students and often disrupts the classroom. This distraction is by design. These apps are built to capture and hold our attention and bring us back for more. The result significantly affects children's academic learning and social development. Right now, technology is winning, and the price is our students' education and social growth. How distracting are these devices? I think many of us know, but there has been some research done on it. Adrian Ward at the University of Texas McCombs School of Business found that the mere presence of a smartphone diminishes a person's ability to focus and learn, even if the device is switched off. Common Sense Media reported in 2017 that 50% of teens felt addicted to their smartphones, a number likely much higher today. This suggests that half of our teens cannot easily disengage from their devices, presenting a substantial distraction that impacts their ability to learn. Moreover, there is a national youth mental health crisis linked to smartphone use, including issues like anxiety, depression, self-harm, and the loss of valuable in-person time with family and friends. This concern is highlighted by experts such as the Surgeon General and the Toronto Western Hospital Department of Psychiatry. Another study by Thomas Joyner and Professor Jean Twenge of San Diego State University reveals that 48% of teenagers who spent 5 or more hours per day on electronic devices reported suicide-related behavior. Joyner notes there is a concerning relationship between excessive screen time and risk for death by suicide, depression, suicidal ideation, and suicide attempts. I don't think we could have predicted the consequences of social media and technology, yet here we are. This is a crisis, and urgent action is required. I support a district-wide policy that blocks access to phones in classrooms and social media sites on school-provided Chromebook and routers serving high school. It's the only way this can work. And if I have a bit more time, I can say from our experience, our daughter no longer brings her phone to school, but she does have access to the social media sites that we're trying to limit on the school routers. So as a parent trying to deal with this at home, I'm hampered as my daughter enters the school system. So we really need your help. And again, I don't think we could have seen this coming, but it's here. Thank you.
Great, thank you for commenting. As you know, we're just starting the policy development around this, so be interested in yours and feedback of other parents as we move ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's something that the community has to do as a group, parents
I have a
included.
feeling we'll be hearing from you a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes public comment.
Great. So the first item on our agenda is a policy that we had been asked to consider, 4.20.010, promotion and retention of students, as it potentially was duplicative and might need to be rescinded, but it sounds like we're going to have an alternative suggestion besides rescission. So go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know. It's my understanding we're not, the recommendation is no longer to rescind it, it's to revise it.
Correct.
Okay, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you're recommending?
Sure. I'm Emily Glasgow. I'm the Senior Director for Pre-K through 5th grade academics in the Office of Teaching and Learning. And that's correct. We are not recommending rescinding this policy in total because we do believe we need a promotion and retention and acceleration policy. But in looking closely at this, there's a couple of places where it is inconsistent with current policies and practices and even kind of best practices in research, and so we believe it needs to be updated. So I can walk through quickly, high level, what those are today, and then our hope was just to sort of start the conversation today and bring an actual draft for consideration back at the next meeting.
Great. Yeah, it'd be helpful to walk through at least at the
Yeah.
high level what you're be proposing so that we get that out there. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, for starters, and the way this actually came to me most recently is there's an inconsistency in policy. A year or possibly two ago, I lose track of time, this committee and then the board voted to do away with our early entry to kindergarten procedure or policy, and it's still referenced in here. So we do need to make sure that comes out. That's under scope of policy. It's the second sentence. And then in looking at this more closely, I think what our team is recommending is that we center promotion as the standard. The standard expectation would be that every child who completes a grade would be promoted to the next grade, with acceleration and retention being exceptions to a rule that need to be really carefully considered. And so for acceleration, which would be the equivalent of what we used to call skipping a grade, we have a policy called whole grade acceleration that goes through our TAG department, where students are actually assessed based on the following year's content to make sure that they'd be ready to skip that content. And then there's a process of review by both our TAG department and the school team before that's honored. And so we'd like to make sure that's reflected in here. Right now it just reads sort of as the school principal can just decide. And then for retention, which needs to be taken equally seriously, we've worked out over the last several years a process of sort of a meeting that needs to happen between the school leadership team and parents, and a whole list of considerations that need to be taken into account. And we have some documents that show what those are, and there's a form that principals should fill out and a process for who needs to approve that. So again, we would just like to flesh this out so that it better reflects our best thinking and our best policies and practices on these things right now.
So is there anything in here that actually is, are there practices that are occurring that are contrary to this policy?
There are practices, I don't know if they're contrary. There are things, I think one of the biggest conflicts right now is the policy reads that all these decisions are made by just the school principal upon recommendation by school staff, when really, in particular, we've added in safeguards around that by bringing in assessment through our TAG department for acceleration, and that there's no mention of assessment in the policy. So I don't know if that's in conflict as much as just we've worked out better procedures that we'd like to have the policy reflect.
Okay.
Mary,
Well, I think also looking at the retention, and this is some of your research, there were a disproportionate number of students,
Correct.
newcomer students who were being retained, right, which was not good for them. And so the list of details that they're looking at now is, in fact, to get a more balanced view of the student as a whole, to prevent unnecessary retentions.
Right. So the form that, could be revised, but that we have principals go through with parents now includes whether a student has an IEP, whether they have a 504, whether they're an English language learner, what their attendance has been like, what interventions have been tried with them. So it's just a more holistic review of what's been going on with the child, and then with research in mind, really kind of weighing what the pros and potential cons of retention would be before a decision is made. So those are the kinds of considerations that we'd like to build into the policy.
Okay. Director Wong or Frankie, do you have any questions?
Just a quick one. What parts of the policy do you want to keep?
That's a good question. I think that a decision ultimately be made by the school principal in collaboration with school staff and parents and guardians is still like the right practice and the right people to be involved in the decision making, but we want to detail out how those decisions are made. The part around a timely manner and involving, so some of these kind of 1A, B, C make sense, but I think are not detailed enough to safeguard against some of the, disproportionate outcomes we see around these practices right now.
Okay, so would the eventual changes and redrafting of this policy be more focused around safeguarding then, right? And getting rid of stuff that are conflicting and no longer best practice?
I think that's a fair summary. And also separating out retention from acceleration and just, again, like stating in a very clear way that promotion is the standard practice.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Frankie, do you have any questions?
Not right now. Thank you.
Okay. So next steps is the next meeting, you'll bring a draft for our review.
Yep.
Okay. Great.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So the next item on our agenda is policy around high school credit earned prior to ninth grade, 6.10.110. And we have this on our agenda because the current practices may or may not be aligned, and there may be potential revisions that are prospective. And who's going to present here? Is that
Good evening. Philip Christie, Senior Director for High School Core Academics.
Lorna Fast Buffalo Horse, Senior Director of Schools in Office of School Performance.
So this is in regards to PPS policy 6.10.100 as well as the administrative directive related to that policy. The policy specifies that students who are not yet in high school can earn high school credit, and the policy specifies that the superintendent or the designee can determine which courses are subject to are approved. The administrative director provides more detailed information about what the approval process should entail. One of the things that we wanted to make sure that is under consideration this evening is that ultimately we want our high schoolers to have a rich, robust high school experience that prepares them for life after college. Our high schoolers need 24 credits to graduate. They can earn up to 32 credits after 4 years of high school. They take 8 credits a year. One of the potential problems with the current policy is that it may incentivize students to take fewer credits and graduate early. Our current practice is to allow middle schoolers who complete algebra in middle school to earn high school math credit, and to allow middle schoolers who complete world language to earn up to 1 credit of world language. So in our current practice, middle schoolers can come into high school with 2 high school credits already, which leaves them with only 22 credits, which they need before they graduate. We know from our data that our middle schoolers who come into high school with algebra credit, about 10% of them stop taking math after their sophomore year, when they've earned their 3 credits. It's 10% across the district. Some cohorts in some schools, it's up to 20 or 25%. So that's one thing that is definitely a concern, something for us to think about. The policy is written fairly broadly. It does specify that the superintendent or the designee should be making ultimate decisions. But again, in practice, this policy is only applied to world language and math. We do not accelerate middle school students through other content areas for several reasons. In English, for example, all of our 9th graders take English classes with their peers. We do not have an accelerated English option at the 9th grade level. And part of the reason for that is because we see many of our 9th grade courses, including English courses, as a place that is important for students to build community, develop a sense of place in their new high school, and to connect with their peers. Math, on the other hand, is much more skill dependent, and students take math at different levels. Students take world language, in some cases starting in 9th grade, but sometimes starting in 10th grade. So these courses are not necessarily grade specific. One possible consideration for the board is to think about whether it makes sense for us to continue offering opportunities for students in middle school to accelerate, but to only use that information for the purpose of placement rather than actually credit receiving. There's no rush. We want, again, our high schoolers to take a full schedule to get the most of their high school experience. We also want our middle schoolers to have a chance to challenge themselves, and we want to make sure that that information is noted on their transcript. But it may be worth considering simply using that information for placement purposes rather than credit accrual.
Just add here that one of my roles is to facilitate or co-facilitate a group of administrators.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, Lorna Fast Buffalo Horse, Senior Director of Schools. And one of my roles is to co-facilitate a group called Policies and Practices, which has representation from every PPS high school and high school program in the form of an administrator and a counselor. And that group identified this topic as the most important thing that they wanted to work on this year. They raised a number of concerns, some of which Dr. Riestick has alluded to, but in the kind of, anecdotal experience of these individuals, they are saying that the majority of students who are awarded high school credit in middle school are not prepared for the next level of the content when they arrive in high school. So that has been identified several times. So a student earns a credit of Algebra 1-2, is placed in geometry as a freshman, and is feeling like they're not prepared. The second concern that has been raised is that 9th grade classes create cohorts to support groups of teachers who collaborate and raise issues of concern for 9th graders. That is part of our Measure 98 plan and model, and it is based on research from the University of Chicago. The third issue that was raised is that in cases where students can move to the next level of content, that sets them up for fewer required classes in high school. It incentivizes them to not have a full schedule or graduate early. And in some ways, it also incentivizes them to miss years of instruction in a content area like math. So if they are required to have 3 classes for graduation, they could finish after sophomore year and have no math their junior and senior year. The fourth issue that has been raised is that high schools typically get many requests from students and their families to remove these high school credits earned in middle school from their transcripts. And so it's already, recognized as a problem. We heard this year from the Office of Teaching and Learning about the kind of redesign of middle grades mathematics, which we think will really support, some of these concerns. But those have been our areas of focus. Language arts, I know, was referenced. It is a class that is required each year in high school, unlike any other class in high school. And it does kind of anchor a master schedule so that students are with their age peers in ways that other classes don't.
How many credits each year are granted to incoming ninth graders?
From middle school, who've earned them in middle school. I think that you want to know how many total? You have that data.
I would love to have a chance to get back to you. When it comes to math, I think we're talking about 1,000 students, maybe 2,000 students, but I want to check.
And then what about the world languages? Same check too. Okay. It would be helpful to know, like in the world languages, which languages they are, and whether this would be for all, whether they're coming from PPS schools. So, for example, say a student came from the international school and they took the STAMP test, which I think is how you get credit. It would be good to know whether that is separated, just have it separated out.
Sure.
So I'm going to ask Frankie and Director Wong if they have any questions, but another question I would have is, I'm make an observation first, which is why I think we're somewhat in this situation. It's a little bit different from when the policy looks like it was last adopted in 1999, and that was when PPS still had a 7-period high school schedule, and I think that their credits required for graduation was different also. So you used to have a lot, when you have 32 opportunities to get to 24, you have a lot more students who are entering their senior year with most of their credit attained, even if they didn't bring any from middle school. So there's just, I think that's another factor that you have a widening gap of what students have left to take. I had 2 high school seniors who I think only had their English credit to take. So I'm just making that observation. Maybe it creates a different environment. What is different from, say, a student taking a class, in 9th grade or in 8th grade versus one of my least favorite things that students do, which is taking PE online when they're in high school because they didn't take it when they were freshmen, and so they take online PE. I was trying to think like how we decide what's okay for students to
To not
not-
take
to
in
not take
PPS.
actually in a high school classroom. Like, how do we distinguish that? Because that's lots of students, for example, in immersion, don't take freshman PE because it means they get fewer electives because their electives are also taken up by their language classes. So in order to get the same number of electives as everyone else, they like skip PE, but then they're like, oh, I don't want to take it as a senior with a bunch of freshmen. So it's just an example. So I'm curious,
Yeah.
how do we distinguish? Because the policy doesn't seem to the current policy doesn't seem to distinguish that.
It's a good question. We can provide more information. My understanding is that we have a robust process for determining which other accredited schools and online programs qualify to provide specific courses. So we have a team of folks that crosswalks their standards with our state standards. So it is quite possible that online PE would actually not be a thing that we allow.
I'd be
But I
delighted
would,
if that were the case, but it used to be.
I will verify. When students transfer in, when they transfer in with a high school transcript, we, by and large, honor what's included on the high school transcript. When students come in from another country, it's a little bit more complicated, but we go through the process of transcribing. When students from another middle school come into high school, it's also a little bit more nuanced and different, and we try to, by and large, apply the same practices that we do for our current middle schoolers, which is to honor high school level math and high school level world language. But we can find out, I think, we can connect with the team that does this work.
And maybe this is a question for Liz or Mary. Do we have a general policy about what credit we accept?
I'm not sure I understand the question. We do have the diploma policy that shows the credits you need to qualify for a diploma, but I'm not sure that's the same.
The school has to have has to be accredited, right? So I think that's something when you're looking at which coming from other schools. And is that the difficulty with the foreign transcripts? It's hard to know whether the accreditation standards are the same.
I guess it was more like if a student took a class at PCC, like a math class. I'm just wondering if we have a policy that says, like, here's what our standard is if where the content came from matters, how we approve it. So say if you took a class at PCC, could be English or math or anything else, I'm assuming that we would say, yes, that
Correct.
counts.
Those are the dual credits. Yeah. Aren't they?
I think in that example, Director Brim Edwards, it makes me think of Jefferson High School, where middle college students who pass classes at PCC have elective credit posted on their transcript. It doesn't satisfy a PPS diploma requirement.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's typically for advanced courses. So we had a student who exceeded all of the offerings in Spanish and took a course at Lewis and Clark. By that point, that student had already met the two required courses, credits for graduation requirements. So the course that he took at Lewis and Clark counted for elective credit, but it was essentially, it's a course that we honored, but correct, it wasn't for the graduation, to meet the graduation requirement. Or students who take advanced math courses or.
So if a student took, say, 200 level Spanish at Lewis and Clark because it fit their schedule, wouldn't recognize that as a world language credit.
200 level being second year of Spanish.
Usually it's like 400, but whatever it is, I mean, would we count that as just an elective, or would we count it as a world language?
I haven't had that experience. In my experience, we want students taking courses at their neighborhood school, following the established sequence of courses that's in our course catalog. When students are looking for ways to enrich and advance, we connect with our university partners, or we work with the family to access those courses, but not for core graduation requirements typically.
I have a couple questions if you're.
Yeah, jump in, Ed.
Yeah, you mentioned there's a work group that's coming up or meeting and talking about this and trying to come up with some suggestions and changes. Do you know when is that going to happen, or when we might expect some results from that or ideas?
Director Wong, are you referring to the group with the current school representatives, or are you referring to the group that considers transcripts when they come in with a transfer student?
The one you mentioned earlier, I think you mentioned with the school groups and the principals were meeting.
Yeah, so we actually paused on this topic because of the work that is currently happening in PPS to redesign the way that students are doing math in middle schools. That really seemed to address a lot of the concerns, and so we took a pause on making a recommendation at this time.
Right, thank you. And as someone, I have a lot to say about this because I've taught ninth graders for 15 years, and I for sure have lots of experience with middle schoolers who came in with credit who were not ready for the next level. I mean, that is a very common thing. I wonder if there's I guess my question is, I wonder if there's a technical fix. I mean, for example, like, I think I don't know, this is maybe a part, sort of a question too. I mean, it may be worth, obviously you've done it, recognizing the difference between, like, say, skill-based courses, such as math or ceramics or world language, right, versus things that require more critical thinking. And we know, like, from best practices, a lot of, like, courses that develop critical thinking, like English and social studies, they require you to be around peers that are of the similar maturation, right? Because when you have long discussions with 7th graders, very different than in long discussions with 9th or 10th graders. So, and then you get very different results from that. And I was just curious about, is there any exploration in terms of, like, differentiating or maybe even changing the language? Like, for example, like, oh yeah, we require 4 years of English, not necessarily 4 credits or something like that. Anyway, just throwing out some ideas, because I'm very curious to hear what suggestions that you all come up with.
Thank you. Yeah, we can definitely take that back, that suggestion. Yeah, and we can also report back to this committee if that would be helpful too.
Did you have other questions, Eddie?
I see Frankie has her hand up, and I can go after.
Oh, okay. Frankie, sorry, go ahead.
My question was just kind of, so you're mentioning these students who aren't prepared, like, when they make the jump to 9th grade, and I was wondering if that's been put in comparison with, like, any data about how prepared students feel across, like, high school levels, because at least in my experience, that feeling of not being prepared despite having the credit hasn't been isolated to just a jump between middle school and high school.
Was that to me? Was that question to me?
No, sorry.
Yeah, I think maybe both of us can address it. I haven't, we haven't broken that down by school. And there may be other ways to break it down also. But, yeah, we can definitely look at, you know, students who have withdrawn their credit off of their high school diploma or off their high school transcript once they get into high school by school, and see if that is, see if we can find that data.
Let me clarify. I was just saying, like, I think that when you were mentioning, like, students getting the credit but maybe not being prepared for that next high school class, I was saying that I think, like, that might not just be a problem when they're moving from, like, taking it early in middle school, but saying, like, within high school, when you move on to, like, the predicted next course, there has also been issues with that. So I was just asking if there, like, had been any data looking at how prepared students feel, like, within high school as well.
Yeah, I'm not aware of data that would kind of answer that question, but I appreciate the question.
Okay, thanks.
I just want to add a couple more things, if that's okay. I think we're also in a much better place now than we perhaps were a few years ago. We have an adopted math curriculum that is now implemented consistently in our middle school courses that qualify for high school credit. The same is true for world language. We went through an adoption process there. Starting this year, we also implemented an annual verification process that is actually called out in the administrative directive. So all of our middle school principals are certifying that the courses that they offer for high school credit meet all the criteria that are spelled out in the AD. And so we're in a space where the implementation of the AD is more consistent, and we have a higher degree of confidence that the curriculum that is being used, that the assessment practices that are being used, that the content of the lessons is more and more consistent with what is happening at the high school level. So we're hopefully moving into a space where some of the anecdotal experiences that our counselors and teachers have described are going to be less and less commonplace. That said, a high school algebra teacher who also teaches Algebra 3-4 or is meeting in PLCs with other higher level math teachers and has a better sense of where their students are headed, or a world language teacher who's also teaching the second and the third and the fourth level, there are going to be some differences. Again, maybe a thing worth considering is that this is less a conversation about credits and more a conversation around making informed decisions about placement, and to say to our students, our middle schoolers, listen, if you love math, here's an opportunity for you to take algebra in middle school, but please know that that means that you're going to be taking math at least through pre-calc and hopefully calc. And if you're really interested in studying world language in middle school, please know that you're going to also get a chance to take 2 more years at least of world language in high school, rather than here's 1 or 2 less credits that you have to take in high school, because that's really not what we're after.
So this is a bigger framing question. Should the policy be earning high school credit, which is a broader topic, or high school credit earned prior to 9th grade? I mean, for example, like, I'm surprised at the fact that we wouldn't take an accredited college course and consider that something comparable.
And I want to make sure I give you the exact answer to the question that you're asking. I would want to check with our virtual scholars director because a lot of the accredited courses, like through BYU, et cetera, are
They're
run
the
through
ones that
that
do the
program.
PE course, by the way.
And PE. In my experience, if we're talking about more advanced courses but to supplant that, I think there would maybe just need to be a compelling reason for why that is.
I guess I have just a fundamental question about whether we should just be amending this policy or whether there's a need for something broader. I don't know. Liz or Mary, do you have a point of view?
I do not. I think our academic experts are really the ones that need to weigh in on whether there are any ODE requirements, our assessment of how that's used for our own student experience across the board as they're describing. I think this is in their area of expertise.
But just so I understand, we don't have some other policy that says you take a class with virtual scholars or a PCC or you do a study abroad. This is how those credits transfer back. We don't have to do it.
So Virtual Scholars is primarily for credit recovery. It can also address credit deficiency, which is what we say when a student transfers from a school or a different district that maybe didn't require health, and they need to make that up. It's not that they failed it, they just need to make it up because they didn't have an opportunity. So yeah, I don't think Virtual Scholars is sort of in that same category.
But I am not aware of a PPS board policy that defines how credit is awarded by the district, what criteria is required to get there. And I think the broader question is that needed, or is that satisfied through other mechanisms that are inputs to that
It's
system?
a much
I don't
better
know.
framing of the question that I was asking. I don't have a point of view. I'm just wondering again from a parent's perspective. Okay, so let's just say, for example, we're going to confine it just to the high school credit earned prior to 9th grade. It sounds like, Lorna, that at some point in time there will be a recommendation because there is a concern or interest that this issue needs to be addressed better than how it's addressed in the policy. Is that?
That was definitely where we started, and then the sign-off process from middle school principals that Dr. Riestick described was just kind of implemented this year. So that satisfied some of the concerns, and then the revisions in kind of middle school math was presented to the committee, and it appeared from that presentation that satisfied many of the other concerns. So we kind of moved forward to the next topic without making a recommendation.
So in general, there's not a sense that this needs to be changed for other reasons that you're going to come up with some sort of proposal. Because if that's the case, and you can circle back with an answer after I make this next statement, because otherwise I think this policy needs to reflect prospectively what we're actually doing. I read it as a parent, and it's not clear that it's just math and world languages. And so ADs shouldn't go beyond the policy. I mean, the policy appears to be a fairly broad, you take a class, it meets these requirements, and then that's how it qualifies for high school credit. And if it really is much narrower, that's what educators are recommending, then the policy should say that, because that's not what it, so that I would say is that as an intermediate step. Maybe if the group comes back with actually we want to take a broader look at it, but in the shorter term, I think that the policy should be revised to reflect the practices or what you're recommending, again, prospectively.
And I want to offer one, Mary just pointed out, an AD that I was not tracking about how foreign transcripts are assessed when someone studies abroad. So there is that guidance in an AD.
And what does it connect to, the graduation requirements?
Yeah, high school, how you, why am I doing this? High school credits, accreditation, so looking at foreign transcript, and then there are a few ADs that address different aspects of sort of weighted classes, things like that.
Okay, so we may already have that covered.
On the foreign study, I think the other ADs, and we just were looking at them here, I was looking in the instruction part, not the student part of the policy manual, my apologies, are mostly internal programs and how they are weighted. The foreign study AD is an external piece, which I think is the crux of your questions.
So I'm just assuming for right now, we're just gonna deal with this policy.
Yeah.
And you can bring, if we're missing some gaps, although it seems strange to me that we would, like I say, this whole issue of taking like the BYU credits and that counting, but something else doesn't, like how do people know that? How do parents know that? How do students know that? And maybe it's because they're listed in a course catalog at PPS, and that's what makes them PPS courses. But for right now, let's just take the high school credit earned prior to ninth grade. So what is, because as I read this, there's a lot of latitude for all courses to earn high school credits, and I'm a lay parent, not an educator. And it also says it's determined by the superintendent or the superintendent's designee according to the criteria. So it seems like the superintendent, and then there's another superintendent can approve things. So that's our current policy. But if we're really going to restrict it to 2 course levels, I think it needs to say that in the policy. Again, it needs to be prospective because an AD shouldn't trump the policy. So what I would suggest is to come up with the language that you think should reflect the practice, knowing that you may change it to years versus credits, so that we actually have something we consider that is something parents and students rely on. The other thing I'm wondering about also, whether when you come back with a recommendation, is whether it should, again, so there's not misunderstandings, that there needs to be some sort of like, this is an approved course before you take it, versus looking at the policy and it seems to fit, but we need to say that explicitly in the policy, like it would be for pre-approved courses. Again, I think clarity is kindness. It just removes ambiguity for parents and students.
That's great. Should we speak to the concern around the potential for students to meet their graduation requirements early and not take a full schedule?
So I think that is,
For us to consider.
You could come back with a recommendation.
Thank you.
I mean, I do think it's really hard, I'll say, like I'm a parent of 3 kids, 2 of them who entered high school with extra credit from, they had world language and math, and like they had all their credits taken by, done with the exception of English their senior year. And so if we have a system that allows that, do we then say, we don't think you should do that?
We'll think about that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And then if you could, for the next meeting, maybe come back with draft language that help. And again, I want to just be clear, because this issue was raised by families, that these are forward-looking changes, And because the policy we have now is the policy we have, and anything we change would be prospective, but I think it's a good, I hope you all would feel free to like come with your best recommendations of what you think is best for students, and we run it by high school principals. Does that work?
Thank you.
Eddie or Frankie, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I'm good.
Not right now.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. So the next agenda item is field trips, foreign travel, and other off-campus activities. And I'm going to turn this over to Director Wong who has asked for us to consider the changes to this policy, and we don't actually have proposed language, but I think you want to come with sort of a conceptual discussion and what issues that we need to consider around changes to be made.
Yeah, I shared a Google Doc with you. I don't know if it was shared with everyone else, but I came up with two versions depending on which path people think would be the better way to go down. So, one sec. Yeah. So the first one, this falls under policy 6.50.010, and under 2, 2, is that an I or 1? The 2 reads, district staff responsible for overseeing extended travel must notify building administrators in advance of the trip so the plans for continuity of curriculum and instruction can be assured for students remaining on campus. Those plans will be communicated to the school community and observed so that no disruption in curriculum or programming will occur for students remaining on campus. And in discussing with this in the Student Success Committee, I think everyone overwhelmingly agree. I mean, this is specifically addressing the issues that the DLI capstone project trips have run into year after year, in that, there's going to Taiwan or China or Vietnam or Japan is a really extraordinary distance to cover, and with the current AD, there's been a lot of limitations, and in fact, so much so that it actually could mean the end of these capstone trips. And so, while everyone really agreed, and so anyways, that was the issue. But I mean, everyone agrees that this is a good policy and that we should be minimizing disruption for those who are not going on the trip. And so, the 2 versions I came up with, one version A I wrote, and version B. Version A is kind of tackling it in a very specific way, and version B is kind of redefining it. So like I'll just read it to I don't know if it makes sense. I don't know if you have it in front of you or have access to it.
Why don't you go ahead, and in the meantime, I'll try and send it to Kara.
Okay. So version A, I just wrote, again, this is a draft in very big capital letters, DRAFT. It would be a subsection of 2, so it would be just, it reads, additional flexibility and requirements and extended time may be granted when the distance travel requires additional time, such as overseas travel, and when the trip, and I specifically wrote and, when the trip involves an exceptional academic experience, such as attending school in a foreign country, as long as the following conditions are met. A, reasonable accommodations have been made to minimize the impact on students remaining on campus. And B, the plans and or accommodations made to minimize impacts have been approved by the school principal. So that was one, and again, it's very specific. Version B is a little bit, well, it's also specific, but it's a different way. So the version B, the other attempt is maybe categorizing these kind of residency trips as its own thing. I don't know, we could call it whatever you want. I just called it short-term travel study just because residency might be actually a better term. So version B reads, if the travel involves attending school in a foreign country, then the trip shall be classified as short-term travel study, which grants the travel exceptional status. Short-term travel study trips shall be granted additional flexibility in time of travel as long as the following conditions are met. It's the same conditions as the previous one. A, reasonable accommodations have been made to minimize the impact on students remaining on campus. B, the plans and or accommodations made to minimize impacts have been approved by the school principal. I guess the kind of the big goal here is A, to protect continuity of the academic experience of the students who are not going on the trip, and also B, kind of giving a little bit more local control back. I mean, I think the principal are the ones who, at least I feel, again, opinions differ and welcome, that the principal are the ones that know best about how certain things are impacting their school and other academic classes, and so kind of referring to their judgment is kind of one of the potential solutions to this kind of ongoing problem that we're having. And that concludes my presentation.
So
Thoughts?
Eddie, I wasn't able to pull up your version, so it sounds like you have it right in front of you. Can you send it over to Kara?
Yeah, I'll do it right now.
I have a couple questions. I think my preference would still be to have it need to be approved by the central office, just given, I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why I wouldn't have the principal signing off on it. I mean, there's risk, the trips have other staff attending, so it seems like that shouldn't just be a school decision. But if you set it up with here's the criteria and they meet it, it should be fine.
Yeah, I think that was maybe I misspoke a little bit. The school principal is the one that approves that the accommodations to minimize impacts to the students remaining behind are satisfactory. Okay. And then it moves on to, like we normally do, to the district staff.
So this is a question that I'd ask you, but something to consider, because I think we should next time come back with the language that we're ready to work. But I think there should be some number that's in the policy. If it's you can't take a principal out of a school for an indefinite period of time and say that has no impact on other students, because that, like, the principal or sometimes other teachers or subs all have an impact on the rest of the student body. So it seems that there would be, I know the current policy doesn't have a day, it's actually in the AD, but I wonder if you've thought about what you consider to be a reasonable time period. And I want to recognize that having made the trip to Vietnam and China several times, it is like a 2-day there and a 2-day back, just frankly so you lose 4 days to travel there, but if you had like a days on the ground number, that could be sort of the setting a guardrail.
Yeah, I guess the issue I have or sorry, not the issue. The struggle I have is that, like, the number of days and, 5 days was the previous, was mentioned in the AD. And so, like, the thought here was that it would be kind of more bigger picture, and that way it gives flexibility for district staff when they write the AD to, it's easier, it would be easier to change to meet current needs or best practices, right? So, like, if they were allowing extra flexibility and it was becoming a huge impediment to other students, then I would guess it would be easier to change the AD, be like, oh yeah, now we need to reduce it, the number of days. Or maybe like they've been doing an amazing job in accommodating so that there hasn't been impact. Or even like, I think it's in the AD that mentions that an administrator has to go along as well. What if they decide like, oh yeah, maybe there's a different person who may be better suited. I don't know. I figure the reason I didn't include a number was just because it gives, keeping the policy kind of like, higher up above general, very general, and then allows more flexibility in the AD to determine.
The only thing is, and I'm happy to be overruled, but if you have if you don't have some day in there, the AD, because the board doesn't set the AD, staff could decide that 5 days is the right number.
Yeah, that's true. But I also want to respect district staff and make sure that they have the ability to do what they think is needed as well. But yeah, if you want a specific number, but I like your specific idea of days on the ground. That makes a lot of sense.
I mean, it just takes into consideration like the time difference. I mean, it is different, and which to me maybe gives you like creates more flexibility. I was just looking at the trip to Vietnam that we just approved, and it's like I can't. I've done a business trip there in 7 days, and it's like you barely are on the right time zone, and then you're gone. So I would suggest some sort of limit in the policy outer range. Again, because it's not self-contained. I mean, if this was like Richmond going with all the students that are in the program, there's less impact than if you have a program that's part of a larger student body. And it seems to be mostly at the middle school, not high school, because high school, obviously, there's just a different set of circumstances.
Right. Yeah.
Mary or Liz, do you have any recommended changes to the topic, or any strong feelings one way or the other?
Having just gotten the language a few minutes ago and looking at it, I think we need some time, and I do think that Margaret and others in OSP should weigh in on the mechanics of these proposals, particularly how the approvals happen for the students who are not going on the trip. And you alluded to that earlier, but nothing yet. I think we'd like some time to chew on it and think through the approval systems.
And what do you think about having the guardrails in the policy versus the AD?
I think when we have, as a general concept, hard and fast numeric rules and policies, there tends to be an exception somewhere that needs to be made. And so, given that the board currently approves international travel, it probably has an easier mechanism if there needed to be an exception. But
Andrew might win that one, though.
Andrew might. I mean, we have been recommending that the board not approve field trips individually for a long time, and I think I've given up on that one. But
what about a range?
A range still has a limit somewhere. Again,
Which I mean, it seems like there should be, because again, none of these programs, especially the middle schools, are self-contained. And as long as we require that an administrator go?
I mean, I do think the effect of it goes to the length of the trip, and I'm not the subject matter expert, but what we have discerned over the years of talking about field trips, the length of the trip and having the administrator of the building potentially gone for that time really is a constraint on how long that trip can be for the effective administration of that building. So that would tend to lead towards A, the principal not approving their own absence and the pieces that go with it, and B, it would probably be better to have it be shorter, I think, or have some limit on it. I know the last time the board voted on this policy, there wasn't a limit imposed, and that's how it ended up in the AD. There was discussion and guidance from the board at that time, but you know, from a policy drafting perspective, those limits tend to, you want to make sure they're really the ones you want to stick without anticipated exceptions. And maybe that's the case here, what the limit should be from a programmatic travel, educational experience perspective for those students going and those students staying. I really think we'd have to defer to the academic experts. And I see Mary wants to say something.
I just want to add that, you know, when we're talking about limits, I think particularly because I've been part of some of these discussions of some of the current trips or the ones we just it should be the limits out of class, right? So many of these trips could occur, for example, during spring break. So you'd have a 2-week period of time, or during winter break when you have a 2-week, 3-week period of time, right? Or during the summer. So there are options that I think we should also have the tours, the study groups thinking about more vigorously.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues that keeps coming up over and over again is that the ones that this is specifically addressing, the Japanese and the Mandarin trip and the Vietnamese trip, the students attend school in those foreign countries, and so the two big issues is kind of in terms of like sustainability issues. So like Japan's not in school during our spring break, and so it would be a fundamental programmatic change. In fact, it would probably maybe eventually just make this impossible to do, because you know they don't want this to be a field trip. It's supposed to be, you know, the students are going to a foreign country and they're attending school. So spring break is not a possibility for the Japanese trip. You know, it could be a possibility for, and this is why, you know, Director Brim Edwards brought up a point, you know, every school has kind of different situations, and so you want to like maintain some flexibility. You know, for the Mandarin trip, that could be a possibility. However, the problem with there is that, you know, we're now asking the teacher who runs this to give up their spring break year after year after year, you know, which is not necessarily fair, because this is, again, it's not a field trip. They're literally going there and working, running back and forth between the schools to make sure all their students are doing well. So it's not, so these are kind of like, I think what the challenge here, I think with this policy is that we have, you know, 3 different programs, potentially 6 different schools, and all of them have kind of their unique challenges that they're individually dealing with.
So Eddie, what we're going to do is take the 2 drafts that you sent and this discussion and ask Margaret Calvert and her team to like provide some recommendations. I would suggest that we look at some sort of range, and maybe it's not a number range, or it could be a number range, knowing that all the courses are, all these programs are somewhat different, and that we want to make sure the experience for the students who aren't on the trip is not at all compromised, and that we also recognize, like I say, it's just, for some of these programs, it's not like you're just on a 3-hour flight. Does that work, Eddie? And then the next time around, do you think that's possible that we'd have that ready for the next policy committee meeting?
And I shared this with John Franco and Margaret Calvert already. Yeah, I like that, what you said.
Okay. Frankie, do you have anything, or whatever? I saw her come in here.
No, I'm just waiting to hear what people have to say.
Okay. Great. So hopefully next meeting we'll have, and I do think Director Wong that you should have something in the policy because otherwise if you're interested in having there be more flexibility in the 5 days, then you should say that in the policy versus, because there's no, staff gets to decide what's in the AD, and it, as long as it doesn't conflict with the policy, then they'll set that. So I want to move on to the next item, which is the cell phones in schools, and this is, I know it's, so this is a huge topic, and I thought one of the things that I want to just maybe talk about how how people are interested in framing this up. So the first thing is there was an ORS. When I was reading it, it almost looked like school districts couldn't tell students they couldn't have their phones.
Only if they're planning to incorporate kind of cell phones into the curriculum. So if they're using their cell phones as the calculator or something like that, then it would be prohibited. But if they are not planning to incorporate cell phone usage into the curriculum, then it can't be. So that's that last paragraph in the statute.
Okay, and every student has access to a Chromebook.
Yes.
Okay. So the answer is we have the ORS, but as long as it's.
Sorry, I keep forgetting. If we are not requiring it as part of curriculum, right? So if we're not requiring that they bring their cell phone to class for whatever reason.
Okay. I was just, when I read it, it was like, wait, can we?
I know, it was a little confusing.
So it's interesting, but maybe not relevant. I mean, the law is always relevant, but you'll tell us not. And so so at the same time that this discussion came up, we also have some schools that have either guidelines or policies. We have Grant, we have an alternative school, Mount Scott, that is,
I'm here for the next topic. I was looking at Mary Kay. I'm Derek Brown, Senior Director of Tech Operations.
okay. So I'll just let me finish framing it up, because the question I'm going to ask of the committee is how we want to proceed. Do we want to get, for the next meeting, do we want to get an overview of policy, like different policy elements? Do we want to look at the pilot that's happening somewhere else, or how we want to approach it? That's kind of my general question. But do you want to go ahead and say something?
Just here to support.
Okay.
I think it'd be helpful to get that guidance on the cell phone issue before we leave that topic. Derek's here for AI, which I think we're not going to get to at all, given another meeting starts in 11 minutes right here. But I do think guidance from you and Director Wong and Student Representative Silverstein would be helpful as we come back the next time about how you want to talk about it. It's a really broad topic.
So I'll weigh in just with my thoughts. So it's interesting because over the last 15 years, this is like one of the most talked about topics of parents and a lot of staff, and frankly, students. And so I think it's a good topic for us to take on, and it seems like we're not the first ones to dive into the topic. So from my perspective, it might take a look at a couple different variations of it, and then certainly have conversations with principals, students, school staff. Is where I sort of want to start. Eddie and Frankie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely think this should have a lot of community input, and that probably getting that in the preliminary stages will kind of help direct where to go with the policy.
Okay, Eddie?
Yeah, I think, Frankie, that's a great idea. I think we should do that. At the same time, I also want to just say, like, what we currently have just it doesn't really work. You know, like, I think every school that doesn't have a strict cell phone policy has, like, the same variation of, like, I think we read in those articles that were sent out about, like, oh yeah, first strike, you know, teacher collects it, and second strike, it goes to the office, and then third strike, the parent has to come pick it up or something like that, right? The problem with that is just logistics. Like, in the school, it's just nearly impossible for every teacher to kind of keep track of 180 students. And not only that, but also the personal risk that, you know, like if a teacher collects a cell phone and it like gets lost or stolen in their care, that's a liability, right? And so whatever system we have right now is my suggestion for direction is that we just need to have a unified policy, or sorry, not necessary policy, but just something that I guess this current status quo just doesn't work. I think we need to do something. And I don't know exactly what that is, and I'm open to other ideas. But it is something that is a huge struggle with a lot of students, a lot of teachers, and a lot of schools. So it's definitely worth tackling.
So would you be supportive of asking staff to come back with a couple of different options for a district-wide approach? And I think there can be ones that are very high level and ones that become more detailed.
Yes, I'd be for that. And also, I mean, I don't know what comes first, like getting the community engagement first and getting ideas, or coming up with options and then getting community input. So
I think it would be good to have some just straw man proposals that or policies from other places that we could look at, and I think we could maybe narrow down what we think are the essential elements, and then have a draft and do a series of engagements with all the parties who have an opinion about that perspective. Does that work?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. Is that enough? And then we had one last, and I'm sorry. I'm just going to make a statement about it.
Okay.
We had one last policy or framework that we were going to talk about, which is the use of artificial intelligence technologies and staff. And what I would ask Eddie and Frankie is to take a look at the framework that was provided and think about what questions you have and whether my just first take at it is we should have something fairly high level because this is going to continue to evolve fairly rapidly. But I would ask that's a homework assignment for next meeting. And send any questions to Liz and Mary.
That works for me.
Sorry.
Sounds good.
Okay. Since we have very little time for the next meeting, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.